Good morning. China's export bans on crucial materials are cascading through our industrial sectors now with deep effects. We shared a presentation last week where experts conclude that the cost to the U.S. economy for China's ban on just one of those metals, gallium, would be over $600 billion. And that analysis assumes that just 30% of China's gallium exports would be cut off. It's now looking to be much higher than that, and for several metals besides just gallium. Here are where things stand on gallium and germanium. Through 2022, the U.S. imported half of its germanium from China, and just over a fifth of our gallium imports came from China. Gallium, germanium, antimony, and super hard materials are now off limits for American importers. And even tighter restrictions on graphite sales are coming shortly. These export bans are in response to U.S. curbs on some memory chips from American and foreign companies to China. The objective for the semiconductor export bans is to slow down China's semiconductor and AI industries, some of which have military applications. But ironically, the Pentagon is even more dependent on Chinese rare earth metals and semiconductors for our own defense systems to work compared to the other way around. And panic levels are rising fast because Beijing is able to clamp down on supplies even further by prohibiting anyone else from selling to the United States. It's the first time China is employing the strategy that Washington has used in the chip wars. U.S. trade laws, strangely, allow the American government to regulate aftermarket sales of any equipment made anywhere by anybody if it contains a single component that was made in the United States. Now China is doing the same thing with their raw materials exports. The measures are intended to prevent international companies from buying Chinese metals, reprocessing them in a third-party country, and selling to U.S. buyers. So our end buyers of these materials have some tough choices. Either use less, recycle more, or figure out how to produce more. For a brief time, some suppliers were acting as middlemen in this way, but now these markets fear reprisal from China, and traders and processors are backing off. Bloomberg's source here refused to be even quoted by name. This is a small world, the market for these metals, so anyone buying and selling is already well known and easy to track, and nobody wants to find out what happens if their company shows up on a Chinese blacklist. These are niche markets, very specialized, and so much easier for China to stop gallium shipments. This Japanese company is Japan's largest importer, and their imports have dropped by half just this last year. Consider how different these markets are compared to the semiconductor chip sanctions. It's commonly known now that the chip bans have been a failure because that is not a niche market. Everyone wants to buy them, and there are lots of companies that make them and many more who sell them. They're easy to carry in a pocket or briefcase. There are thousands of buyers across the world for semiconductors who can just resell them to Chinese buyers or put them into servers and let Chinese companies pay to use them. Even with the hard export bans on advanced semiconductors, they are still in the market and the prices for them are holding steady. But in these markets, for these metals, the prices are ripping higher, and everyone thinks that the supply problems are just starting. Germanium and antimony have hit all-time records. Gallium is at its highest level in 13 years. The vertical axis is the percentage increase in price since China's export bans were put on. Gallium and germanium have doubled since last year. Antimony more than tripled. So the challenge now is to find new suppliers or get mines and refineries going for those at home. But now analysts are worried about other key minerals that are critical to defense systems and which we do not have domestic sources for. Tungsten, titanium, and a handful of others. Industries that never had a problem before now are realizing they've got one, and they can't get the metals even if money is no object. The real issue is the scarcity of all these metals and the fact that China is the bottleneck through which they all flow. Global output of gallium is under 1,000 tons per year, and China has almost all of it. If China wanted to throttle a market, it makes sense to start there with the gallium. And we're not even close to the damage they could do across these sectors were they to really tighten the screws on these other materials that they have monopolies in. Here is the production for germanium and gallium, China compared to everyone else. In theory, our own mining companies could just go after producing more. Rio Tinto is a huge mining group, and they're crunching the numbers on some of their mines in Canada to see if it's worth it. And another company has some potential in Greece. But here's the problem for those guys. If they invest a lot of money to scale up production, China could just relax their restrictions and send prices back down again. These companies need guaranteed prices for long-term contracts. In the case of germanium, it's interesting how China's export bans have taken down the brokerage and the trading markets for the metal. Traders in London, Hong Kong, and on Wall Street used to function as market makers, building up inventories at low prices, then releasing them into the market during times of shortage and higher prices and making money that way. But those traders have been locked out of the markets too, and Chinese customs agents are only approving sales to established end users and to end users who are affirmatively not going to be reselling into the defense industry. The storage hubs for these metals are in Amsterdam and Hong Kong, and their trading volumes have dropped to zero in both metals in both places. Following the germanium trading restrictions from China, the White House sent teams to Belgium and the DRC to find supplies for domestic producers, including defense and space contractors. Germanium is necessary to keep satellites in the sky and to tell the missiles where to go, and the Chinese have decided that it's maybe not how they prefer to see their germanium used. We reported on the antimony problem before too, and antimony truly is in short supply everywhere, and the global shortage gets worse every time a bomb blows up in Ukraine or in Gaza. And there are some deposits in Tajikistan, Myanmar, and Turkey, but those countries are much more friendly with China than they are with us. There's only one deposit that we know of so far in the US, and the Pentagon has provided funding to a company there to plug the gap for antimony. It's possible that 30% of America's antimony demand could be satisfied by this Idaho mining project. There's two obvious problems though, is that 30% is only 30%, and nobody knows where the other 70% will come from. And of course, the mine is years away from producing anything. A smelter in Montana has been operating at 50% because they cannot get new antimony. When China made their announcement to ban the exports of antimony, the calls from the Defense Department started. It's hard to find supply, he says. They've been on the phone for 4 months trying to find new antimony supplies. Every day, the Pentagon calls the same small handful of people that they know to see if they found new antimony since yesterday. I have to say that I am as cynical as can be, but this is all surprising even to me. I admit that I did think that there must be a plan for all this, that we had somewhere a secret giant reserve of all these metals, something like a strategic petroleum reserve, but for gallium and germanium and antimony. But we don't. If China doesn't or won't sell to us, our satellites are just going to fall down, I guess. I never did imagine that our most senior White House and Pentagon officials thought that these metals come from investment banks in Hong Kong or the Netherlands. But they did think that. Then China puts on an export ban, predictably could add, and suddenly they wake up to a big problem. Uh-oh. Maybe someone should go to Africa, see if anyone in the Congo might have a big pile of germanium they're not using. This is Fujian province. Be good.